I was the intellectual equivalent of a 98-pound weakling.
I don't know. I thought it gave me a sort of intellectual look.
Intellectuals! Wise guys!
Intellectuals nothing, why?
Mr. Bates, I've seen all your
I hardly think he'd be lecturing at the Sorbonne if he's a pseudo-intellectual.
To acquire intellectual property by legal institutions.
Permanently doubled my intellectual capacity.
Despite this, I try to behave as an ordinary intellectual.
Pseudo-intellectual and self-destructive?
Yeah.
At that time, I was not the mental giant you see before you. I was the intellectual equivalent of a 98-pound weakling. I would go to the beach and people would kick copies of Byron.
Other side.
Why?
I don't know. I thought it gave me a sort of intellectual look.
It conceals the incipient baldness. I thought...
I know all about guys like you. Intellectuals! Wise guys! Don't mess up my floor! Swallow your damn...
Bates, excuse me, what have you got against intellectuals?
Intellectuals nothing, why?
Mr. Bates, I've seen all your films. You really feel threatened by them.
Threatened? You're kidding me.
Intellectual. Just a little bit.
Gil, I hardly think he'd be lecturing at the Sorbonne if he's a pseudo-intellectual. You should give him your book to read.
Come on, what?
All other tasks. To acquire intellectual property by legal institutions for internal repurposing.
You can imagine my joy when I discovered that the shock had permanently doubled my intellectual capacity. Otherwise, my researches here would have come to nothing.
Despite this, I try to behave as an ordinary intellectual, working to complete my book, documenting.
No.
Writer, composer, tortured pseudo-intellectual and self-destructive.
Yeah, I know. Sometimes she gets on my nerves with her crack.
Very good. I'm an intellectual.
Shut up, you intellectual.
Shut up, you expel.
About in his city suit.
Here we go. Oh, you fucking English intellectuals. You think you're so superior, huh? Even you need more.
The middle sister Evelyn, the school teacher, married to Leonard, the intellectual, the professor, the communist, religious.
So are we, Mr. Catley. The few are those men of such intellectual and cultural superiority that they're above the traditional moral concepts.
What is it you do?
I suppose you'd have to say I am an intellectual.
We have two simple choices. We can get all bent out of shape, intellectualizing or bench pressing logic, or we can simply relax and enjoy it.
And her eyes move over to those brown leather bad boys from the Inside Encyclopedia's intellectual edition. It's fuck time. You know what I mean?
I think that chess dominance proves Soviet intellectual superiority over the decadent West.
I don't really care about politics.
They're using chess to say,
Story?
An easily spotted cheap one.
I know it's nothing terribly intellectual like you must be used to. It's just a...
He has a PhD in mathematics. I suppose you could say he's an intellectual. It would do him a world of good.
He is the toast of the Parisian music halls. His performance endears him as well to many leading French intellectuals who see in him a symbol for everything.
My voice back! We have too many intellectuals who are afraid to use the pistol of common sense. Ethical and intellectual superiority, which is caused, whether you like it or not, by blood.
You about his. And there is a clear physical and intellectual connection between us. Have I covered the bases?
You forgot to mention your wife.
I love her.
This is the world you like. You've got nothing to burn but your intellectuals. Well, those are the boobs that make our life.
How do you know that?
I set out to be an active world changer and wound up a passive intellectual who can't fuck.
Well, Abe, maybe.
Don't think you can persuade me with appeals to my intellectual vanity.
I don't think I'll persuade you at all.
Cinema. An alternative to what he considers the Jewish German intellectual cinema of the 20s. And the Jewish-controlled dogma of Hollywood.
Thinking about the LHC has been the center of my intellectual life for about 15, 16 years now. Depending on what happens with the LHC, you know.
Prove himself right.
Was it not your vanity, your stubborn intellectual pride that brought you into conflict with Bernardo before?
Look at Van Doren. I should have held out for a lot more.
You prostituted your intellectual ability for money.
That's the difference between me and Van Doren, I admit.
This is no longer a problem. Intellectuals and journalists like to make publicity out of it, to give it some kind of political substance.
To confuse or infringe upon the McDonald's trademark, which is now the exclusive intellectual property of Mr. Raymond A. Kroc. Thank you, gentlemen.
Wow. You must have read some pretty big books to get to be the big intellectual.
You're gonna add...
Nietzsche. You like them. They're refugees, intellectuals, bohemians. Hampstead is full of interesting people.
I always say, look on the bright side. You're in a small ghetto, intellectuals, professional people. You're better off than us. Here in the large ghetto, it's a cesspool.
A monkey decided to come down from a tree. Transitioning from the brain of an ape to your incredible intellectual prowess took us about 7 million years.
We met today at the library, if you can believe that.
I'm sorry about my coat. It's too big for your closet.
We were both pretending to be intellectuals.
It's amazing. I love your coat.
No,
She has this crazy idea that if she marries an intellectual, she will have genius.
Because what if you ended up attracted to her?
Could you please stop worrying? She's a self-obsessed pseudo-intellectual. I mean, yeah, she's pretty, but so what?
She is. She's very pretty.
And I was reported via formal letter. I assumed he'd introduce me to the leading intellectuals of the day. This did not happen. I assumed that he ignored
goodness, zeal, and vigor, and intellectual promise. The flower of a generation.
Or some steaming mound of hackneyed tripe.
Yeah, doesn't think much of your stuff, does he?
The man's a complete intellectual non-entity. He's an absolute buffoon, which is probably why he finds so much of a...
Did you see? Where are you going?
Intellectual curiosity, Philip. Sounds fun in there. Come with me.
Oh, please.
I get it. Here's the thing. It's all a bunch of intellectual bullshit. She's not here.